And I'm going to start off just by telling you a little bit about how the coaching curriculum came to be. Those of you who know me know that Pat Sullivan is my husband. He's also on faculty at UNC and the founder and chair of the PGC. And we were taking a walk and just talking about how much trouble some of our junior faculty members were having. And we actually started talking about a particular subset of faculty who were junior faculty, who were women, who had young children of various ages, whether they were infants or school age, who were suddenly in this position where they needed to work from home, keep their productivity up, homeschool their children or mind their children, and just stay sane during the pandemic. And we're pretty clear that this is not a short-term thing. This is going to be going on for quite some time. We have no idea if schools are going to be back next year. And so we said we need to do something about this. At which point I called up Jen, who is a master psychotherapy developer. And we've been working together for a long time doing just that. And I was like, all right, let's put this thing together. And we whipped it together very fast. Yep. Piloted the first group, all with women who fit that profile, and really had an amazing experience. It was amazing not only for the participants, but I also think for Jen and me. It gave us a place where we could share what was going on with us. It was coaching, so it wasn't therapy, so we were in a nice position where we could also share what our experiences were. And it ended up being, for lack of a different term, quite a healing experience, I think, for everyone who was involved. So we figured, let's share it. Let's train some more people up and see if we can get this thing disseminated as widely as possible. And so basically, here's the way it goes. The entire program is set up so that the first week you have one session, which is very much just sort of an introduction and planning session. And then for 4 subsequent weeks, we have 2 one-hour sessions per week. And the first session is didactic, where we really present new information. And then the second session is really sort of discussing how the homework went, thoughts about the didactic material, and just people's experiences during the week. And that format seemed to work out really well, because we initially tried doing sort of like both didactics and discussions in one day, and we found there simply was not enough time to do it. So that format really arose from the experience in the first 2 weeks of our pilot. So on the first day, we did it later in the week, so about on a Thursday. And the first session is very much just a welcome and brief introductions, sort of like what we did now, only we sort of included in those introductions, what's your situation? And it would be like, I'm a junior academic, I'm going up for tenure, I'm going up for promotion, I've got a child, age 7 and 4, and my husband has a full-time job that has absolutely no flexibility. That for example, just so we got a sense of what the person's situation was like. And just saying in the very beginning, even though we did it with this profile of people in the first time, it's an extremely flexible curriculum. So, this will work for guys, this will work for senior academics, this will work for people who are clinicians on the front line. I think, we built it to be flexible so that you could create a group of your liking and adapt it accordingly. And then we spend some time in that first session discussing the goals and the expectations and the format of the coaching sessions. And one of the things that we do bring, well, actually, I'll just go through this first. We then do a brief check-in. And one of the things that we found is, given the complexity of the pandemic and how things do seem to change from day to day and week to week, it's actually important just to get a sense of how everyone in the group is faring, and particular challenges that they might have faced, or we had a very dispersed geographical group, so they were all dealing with different phases of the pandemic at different times. And then the last piece is selecting homework for the next session. And now I'll take you through these piece by piece. So we talk about the goals of our time together, and basically it's learning how to cope with life during the pandemic more effectively. And there are really 2 pieces when you look at sort of what the topics are. One of them is sort of like dealing with work-related issues. And the second one is very much just mental and physical well-being during the pandemic. And obviously those aren't separate, they're totally interdigitated, but those are sort of like the two sort of superordinate categories that we cover across the curriculum. And the goal of the sessions is very much to create a supportive and non-judgmental space for us to share concerns and guidance with each other. And the sharing across attendees is equally as important as the information that they get from the coaches. We just saw so much support and understanding, and yeah, me too, that went on during the course of the coaching, that it really became a second and very strong source of support. We underscore from the beginning that coaching is not therapy. We don't want these sessions to become very focused on an individual and specific problems that they're having. And as a coach, it's really wise for you to have resources in case you notice that someone might need a referral. So keep your eyes open for that. And one of your goals as a coach is being able to manage the level on which you do the coaching, and not, sometimes our tendency is to dive into a therapeutic stance and to go into sort of like seek out potential avenues to do therapy, but you need to feel comfortable closing that door and putting a bow on it. I'm guessing Jen has something to say there.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I think not only for you as a clinician or even as a group leader, do you have to have that distinction clear, but to also teach it to the group, because maybe some people have been in therapy or group therapy, or some people, they think maybe this is like therapy. I don't want to say anything, and so, if I find it helpful to think of it, it's like a class, more like a supportive class, a psychoeducational time. And just so like we didn't do psych screens of, we weren't doing individual interviews. So, so you are going in knowing less of your members than you might know if you've run like any kind of clinical groups before. But no, everything else, Cynthia, you've already covered it. That's what was on my mind.
Yep, great. And then we just go over the format of the sessions. And for every session, we do a welcome and a check-in. We introduce new material, and then we give homework. And just like you do in good cognitive behavioral therapy, homework becomes the sort of the link between session number 1 and session number 1+1. You assign it at the end, and it's the first thing you talk about. And you make sure that you really focus on the homework, because we want to make sure that this becomes a living, breathing skill set that they're using outside of the coaching sessions. And then you use this time to set up your sessions. And basically, we did 1 hour at 1 hour per session, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we did it at a time where everyone felt like their kids would be asleep, or their partners would be able to look after the kids if they had partners. Just negotiate those times and make them fixed, because it's nice to have them be predictable. Mm-hmm. And then really the only work product from that first session is choosing your first homework assignment. And we decided that the first homework assignment should be something that's simple and something that's achievable and something that they can at least aspire to do every day. And we really just focused on picking a simple self-care behavior. And whether that be eating regular meals, sleeping, going to bed at a regular time as much as possible, getting some sort of physical activity, getting outside and walking, mm-hmm. or something that you find particularly enjoyable or relaxing. And, we were so gracious in terms of, we don't have expectations that you do this every day and you come back and you report that you've done it every day and you've been a good student and gotten an A+, but just give it an effort. And giving them permission really to do something that is focused on self-care.
Yeah. As small as that may be. I think I remember one of our moms said, I sat down while I ate my breakfast.
Right.
Oh, we have a question. Okay. Do we use our handouts virtually or provide? Yeah, what we did is we emailed a PDF of our document. And since we were, developing it and editing it as we went, we just sent it in advance of the next meeting. But, at this point, you could either take this whole, you know, slideshow and email it all at one time, or you can edit as you want and send it as you go.
Yeah, and the guideline document was just for the coaches, so that's not something that we shared with the participants. That's just to help you realize what should be done or we recommend doing during each session. Mm-hmm. Jen, thanks for letting me know if there's a question, because I can't see the chat box.
Yes, I'll do that.
Lovely. Okay. And then you go into your second week. And as I mentioned, the first session of the second week of every week is Didactic. And we present the agenda to the group, and the first thing is a welcome and a brief homework review. And then the discussion topic for the day is how to work smart during the pandemic. And then, of course, assigning homework for the next meeting. So the first thing we do, as mentioned, is homework, and we ask people how they did with their daily self-care behavior. And pretty much we let people sort of volunteer, whoever wanted to go first. Most of the time, most of the people in the group did want to share what happened, but of course there was no pressure to do so. But people were quite forthcoming, actually, in telling us little things that they did, such as, I sat down to eat breakfast. She realized that she had been running around all the time, like feeding the kids or getting someone ready for this, that, or the other thing. And she said just 5 minutes to sit down and eat a muffin just was the one self-care thing that she did. And little things like that they were able to use and trade, so that there was also this sense of we're trading self-care and giving other people ideas of what worked. And then we just problem solved if they did have difficulty doing any self-care, how we could help them do better in the next week.
Cindy, can I pop in real quick?
You can pop in whenever you want.
So one important point I find is that this is your first time doing homework review. Okay, so you're setting a stage for what it's going to look like in terms of a group process, but also your expectations and in terms of people sharing, accountability of did they do anything. And I would say for, you know, supervising beginning therapists, one of the easiest kind of pitfalls to fall into around homework is giving it insufficient attention. So either just saying, oh, did you do it? No, I was busy, and then people moving on, or, oh, you took a walk, great. Okay, moving on. So we really gave good time. I mean, I would think at least, you know, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on, if it's on a didactic day, at least 10 to 15 minutes, really just, and we had about, what, 6 people. So think about that, like everybody got a number of minutes to talk, and then it was a back and forth about, praising what they did, encouraging their efforts, validating the struggle, other people popping in and talking about how that connected to them. So it really is an important part of the group process throughout the whole coaching series, but especially I would just wanted to highlight this is your first one. So be like, I'm comfortable, as much as I love to talk, I am comfortable waiting, kind of giving that expectation of, okay, I expect more people to share. And I think that really does end up being such an important part of the experience is when they share their homework together.
Great. Thanks, Jen. And so the key domains for this didactic session are working during COVID-19 and emotional and mental well-being. So good work habits, focusing on daily structure and routine, and going through the process of replanning your future projects, papers, grants, whatever your typical work products are. And then on the mental and emotional well-being side, we were dealing with a bunch of junior academics who tend to be highly ambitious and perfectionistic people anyhow. And one of the biggest things that we had to deal with when it comes to rewriting your expectations is how to manage your own perfectionism and self-disappointment, as well as just this baseline level of worry and fear that we're all dealing with, learning how to, dealing with challenging emotions, and persistent all the way through the coaching curriculum, focusing on self-care.
Yeah. And as we did develop this for this particular group, but I would say that first bullet, that first half, that could be subbed in for whatever you're doing, right? So let's say you're running a coaching program for at-home parents, right? I think that first part you could modify that to content to be more around parenting or homeschooling, or so this was for working individuals, and that was a particular goal they had, was how do I work in the midst of all this. So you could just think that first half of the slide, oh, how would I adapt that to the population, and the second half will probably hit everybody,
right? And we're sending this out just as a regular PowerPoint, so you can play with it and tailor it till your heart's content to whatever your groups are going to be. So the focus on work potential during COVID-19 is really aiming for working smart instead of working harder. And part of it is recognizing that the demands on us when we're working now are much higher, and the resources that we have, both physical resources as well as emotional and mental resources, are actually much lower. And we talked a lot in the group about just how much of our mental and physical energy is really dealt with sort of processing the pandemic, reading the news, understanding the impact it has on our life and our family's life and our parents' life and our children's life. And that all subtracts from the sort of font of resources that we normally have. And the overarching skill that we really want people to keep in mind is focusing on being effective and doing what works, not what you want to work, not what you think should work, but actually what works. And also acknowledging that that might change on a weekly basis. And I think, for people who like to be in control, the fact that you're having to revise these things pretty frequently can be pretty disturbing and distressing. But keeping reminding people that we're all in this boat together, and that we're all having to constantly revise our expectations and our strategies for being effective creates a sense of community that makes it feel a little bit less burdensome.
Yeah. And I'll add in here that things, particularly if you're the teacher, the clinician, this may seem so straightforward to us. Of course, the demands are higher. Like, we have our kids now at home, or we are dealing with a pandemic and thinking through how do we stay safe while we get food. But I think naming this and repeatedly validating, underscoring your life is so much harder, and these are all the specific ways it is harder, is very affirming for the group members. Because remember, you're not necessarily seeing people who've even been in therapy before. So they may not have that kind of internal reflection or at the ready.
And so some of the strategies that we presented about how to work smart during COVID-19 are, one is really setting realistic expectations. We had so many junior people who were, trying to write grants while their toddlers and their cats were climbing on their keyboards, and, trying to keep up the same level of work as they were doing before COVID-19. And they weren't cutting themselves a break, and acknowledging that none of us are concentrating as well as we did before. None of us are having sort of 4-hour-long work sessions where we can just think and create and, be whatever we typically are. I know, like, for example, what always happens to me is every time I sit down to work, Instacart comes early. And, all of a sudden I have to stop everything I'm doing, put my mask on, get out my Clorox wipes. And it's like, oh my God, I give up. But again, I just need to reset my expectations and realize this is the life that we're living in right now. And actually sharing those little anecdotes really helps. And I think one of the things that we heard from our people was that it was so comforting for them to hear that their senior mentors were going through the same stuff they were. And, sometimes when you do therapy, you don't do a lot of self-disclosure, but in this case, when you're coaching and when we're all in this together, I think it was actually a really effective intervention for them to know that this hits you no matter how senior you are. The second thing was prioritizing your time and your work tasks. Really in the beginning of the day, thinking through what it is that you're going to be able to accomplish. And I think Jen has the best line here. And, Jen always says in the beginning of the day, she writes out her task list, and then she divides it by 50%.
Right.
Right. And then you go away, and then you come back and you divide it by 50% again. And then and only then does it enter into the realm of doable. And, you know, Jen's got 3 kids and they're all at home and her husband works and she just can't do what she did before. The third thing is thinking about your work habits. And this really has to do with people who are working at home. And, you know, one of the things, it's like the Instacart thing, you know, suddenly there is no clear dividing line between home and work. You don't have those buffer periods, like when you get in your car or your bike or you walk to work and there's a transition between home time and work time. And laundry can happen in the middle of a Zoom meeting. You know, and that doesn't happen when you're at work. When you're at work in your office, you don't all of a sudden hear your wash machine beeper go off saying time to change a load. And suddenly we're in this position where we're having to shift set all the time. And that in and of itself is a mental drain. So it's just acknowledging that, and when possible, chunking things so that you don't have to shift set. Although with kids and with other situations, you can't always control that.
So also with the idea of being effective, like for myself, I would prefer to get going on my work early in the morning, but I've now learned after different efforts, like, okay, early in the morning, like that 7 to 9 is when my boys focus the best on their schoolwork. So now it's like, I don't even try. I just focus on them, get their schoolwork largely done. And then I can get to my work and feel less kind of preoccupied with what are they doing, or we have less power struggles because, you know, they're working when their interest is higher. So that's an example too of the when.
Yep. And try to create a workspace for yourself. Lots of people are challenged by not having adequate space to create a workspace, but even if you can find a little corner that becomes yours and is comfortable, make that space. And then ask for help, support, accountability, and delegate when you can. And I think a lot of us are not accustomed to asking for help and are concerned that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But we talked a lot with our group, even across peers. This is a time when you can sort of like almost barter for assistance. And an example that we gave is, you know, like I could write a paragraph on eating disorders with my eyes closed and my hands tied behind my back, but yet someone else might really have to spend a lot of time looking up literature and whatever. You know, fling an email and say, can you help me? Could you do this for me? And then I can do this for you. And especially women, I mean, we have this long history of being able to do this kind of thing for each other. And now we almost need to resurrect some of those old tools that really make women highly effective in groups. And we can teach that to men as well. And the last 2 things are avoiding comparisons with others. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because I think it was really a big one. And people were so concerned that people who were at their level academically or professionally, but had less constraints to their current situation, were going to advance more easily. And they're going to come out the other end of the pandemic smelling like a rose, whereas they were really going to be hampered in terms of progress because of homeschooling and watching kids and whatever. And we really spent a lot of time talking with them about avoiding comparisons with others, focusing on your rewritten goals and expectations for yourself and communicating that very clearly with your superiors, so that you're all comfortable with your rewriting of what your trajectory is going to be. And then just keep problem solving, you know, really focus on problems are going to keep arising, and we're going to be teaching some problem solving skills, and just use them throughout your days. Mm-hmm. And then for session 2 homework, of course, we want people to continue doing self-care. But for what we wanted them to do for the next week is to practice implementing 1 or 2 of the strategies for working smart. Just pick a couple of them, give it a go, trial and error, see which ones work for you, and then bring that back into the next session to see how it works.
So now that, you know, as Cindy has laid out, we have 4 weeks where there's didactic and discussion, right? So this is the second half of that first time through there. And for all of our discussion meetings, they're going to follow the same process or the same flow. You're going to greet your members, and then you really just have a nice chunk of time available to say, let's go through what you did. You know, what did you try? What worked? What didn't work? Awesome for trying things, fantastic if they worked well, and what a bummer when they don't. And what else, you know, can we add to, you know, what you tried? What can we troubleshoot? Is the principles, the experiences from the didactic meeting, to, you know, 2 days before, and giving people just a time to connect and share with each other. I think they really get a lot out of these discussion sessions. And then we set them up for what we wanted them to do for the next meeting. And what we asked them to do was keep building the whole time. It's keep doing what you've been doing, and then take on one more strategy or one more step. And where we're going to move next is moving into some basics of cognitive behavior therapy, and particularly with a focus on looking at how they're thinking. And so we wanted them to begin, as we do in CBT, you know, you begin with thought monitoring. Just start paying attention to what types of thoughts that you're having, and in what particular ways are those challenging. You know, is it the nature of the thought itself, like the content of the thought? Is it the frequency of the thoughts, the intensity of them? Are they preoccupying you? Just start paying attention to what you're going through in terms of your thought process, and bring those observations in. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to take you through particularly the next 2 weeks. And this is our most like therapy light still, but therapy content. And I'm hearing that we have a range of experience, and I'll try to teach somewhere in the middle. So for some of you, this may feel like, oh yeah, I know all that. And hopefully for those of you who are newer to CBT, you'll get the gist of what we're talking about here. So same schedule, right? Same thing. This is now your next didactic. You're saying hi, you do your homework review around what they noticed about their thoughts, anything else around the work. And what is typical is that whatever they did in terms of their observations related to your didactic topic, you're going to integrate that in to whatever they're going to tell you. So a lot of our women were talking about how anxious they felt and how worried they were, and how they would have a hard time, like that their mind would just want to run a lot, like run on like the hamster on the wheel of like, when is this going to end? How long is this going to be? You know, how I can't do this forever. You know, lots of thoughts around like predicting the future, being worried about the future, or a lot of self-criticism, you know, saying that they're not doing a good enough job as a worker or as a parent, for example. And so when you're hearing that during the brief or homework review, you just kind of, you know, tuck those in and then bring them back out when you're doing your teaching. Just doing a simple version here of what is CBT. So we just talked with the members about, basically you're talking about an approach to therapy that says what your experiences are based on how you make sense of things, right? So you're in a specific situation. Oh, and let me pause. The way I'm talking to you right now is the way I'm talking to the group members. Just so you understand, like the way that the language I tend to use or my style, this is very consistent for me. So I'm saying now to them, hey, like we're all going through this, you know, amazingly surreal, crazy time. So like within this specific situation of like living in a pandemic, oh my goodness. And the way that we think about things is going to influence how we feel emotionally, and influence what we do behaviorally, which also influences how we feel, which also influences how we think. So there's this whole internal process that's happening all the time. And we may or may not even be aware of it. And so we want you, our group members, to start paying attention to this, because if you start learning what's going on in your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviors and how those things are interconnected, you're going to have a lot more choices in terms of how you want to be, right? And where you want to take your mind, how you want to be thinking, how you want to be feeling emotionally, what types of behaviors you would rather do. And we're going to help teach you some strategies to facilitate that. So that's kind of like the basic CBT thing. I'm not breaking out a big Beck book and assigning chapters and lots of handouts. This is coaching, right? So just kind of giving the idea to them. So now that hopefully they get a sense of like, oh, that makes sense. Like my thoughts, my emotions, my behaviors, all that's interconnected. And you want to give examples for that. For example, hey, if your life was like ridiculously over scheduled, as is very common for all of us, you know, there may be times, particular days, or even maybe immediately after the COVID thing just started, where you got like cancellations, right? And if your thought was, oh man, wow, what a relief, I don't have to like deal with X, Y, or Z now, right? Then you may have some like just feeling relief or feeling less stressed, and behaviorally kind of being in it like, oh, awesome, like I'm kind of pumped about this. This is going to be great. You know, I'm going to have all this extra time. You may take that same exact experience on a different day. For example, I learned recently that we're at week 10, which is about the same time, just for those of you who are parents, right? This is where we are when we're ready for school to start. Okay, so think about what it's like for you when you're 10 weeks into the summer and you're like, everybody needs to go back to school, like this is done, I'm done, right? So the specific situation there has changed. So if I'm dealing with all these cancellations, and on a day where I'm like, man, I'm really was looking forward to all those things, now I'm disappointed and I'm frustrated that I don't have them, and then I might feel like more down and in a funk, and then I like kind of get quiet and I don't do a lot that day, right? So you want to teach how the thoughts and emotions and behaviors influence each other, give them some examples. So now we can talk a little bit more about what are some of the thought patterns that could be going on during COVID-19. And these were things that the group generated, Cindy and I came up with. You may also have other observations yourself. But first and foremost, we want to normalize that it's really understandable to be super worried right now. Like in a lot of times this is on top of, for people who already are anxious and who may already worry anyway, but this is where we might have legitimate worry. There's a legitimate fear and threat out there to your health and to your livelihood, financially perhaps, and to your life and your way of life as you know it. And so it would make sense to have a lot of worries, fears, and concerns about your own performance, or how are you doing at life right now, and how are other people doing? Not only in terms of are they working better, but are they? There's also lots of potential to judge not only myself, am I doing a good job, but also judging whether other people are doing a good job, like watching other people maybe not wear masks, or other people continuing to go to the store, or this or that or the other. So put it all together, your mind has a whole lot to think about, and most of it's negative, right? Most of it is going to create a lot of fear and worry, guilt, shame. And we want the group members to be prepared for that and to start catching that. And also just normalizing that from a process perspective, it can be really hard to even focus cognitively right now, that your mind may be jumping from thing to thing, that you're having a hard time being in the moment, and instead kind of thinking a lot about the past, things that you've lost or missed out on, or looking ahead to the future and what you can't predict or what you're scared you're going to lose, or, so basically minds are super active right now and may not be helping us out in that way. So now we've got them hopefully understanding that it's important that they look at what their thoughts are doing, that it influences how they feel and how they behave. And then we want to get even a little bit more specific here and say, hey, we can't just automatically assume because we think something, therefore it can be fully 100% trusted. So now we're introducing the idea of thinking errors from CBT. And we just picked a handful of these that we thought were particularly notable for us personally, as well as what we've been hearing from the group, but you can certainly add others to it. Basically, look out for these different ways, and I'll focus particularly on maybe those top 3 of how your mind might get you into trouble. So the first thinking error there is, perceiving life experiences as a dichotomy, as all or nothing, or black or white, when in reality, it really is much more of a continuum, right? So like, I did nothing today would be example of a thought. Like, I got nothing done, right? The day was a waste. And we had one of our group members, as she went through the group, she said, you know, I've started writing down everything I'm doing, including my home tasks. And I'm starting to realize that I'm getting a lot more done than I think I am. Now, it may not be what she was hoping for, like thinking back to what Cindy was talking about in terms of the goals and expectations of what she should be doing, but she was like coming to terms with, wow, there's a lot more that's happening. I need to give myself more credit than I think, because my mind wants to say like, you didn't get anything, right? Catastrophizing is exactly what it sounds like, right? Like predicting a catastrophe, like the worst absolute case scenario, and combining that with inability to cope oftentimes. So not only is it like, oh, like I'm going to get fired and we're going to, you know, so we're going to get sick and and I won't be able to handle any of that. So you can understand a number of ways people would be catastrophizing about health outcomes, but also about work outcomes or school outcomes for their kids. And we want to just label that. And it's super helpful just to even for catastrophizing, just to even label, okay, I'm catastrophizing. Let me get back to kind of being in the present. Let me get back to the moment. And mind reading is, you know, knowing, like in your mind, fully believing that you know what other people are thinking. So we had members talk about partners that didn't want to help, but didn't necessarily ask partners for more assistance with managing the kids or home schooling, or predicting that their bosses would be completely, you know, were very disappointed with what they're doing and think that they're, you know, performing inadequately, that kind of thing. So you're going to just teach this to them just as you would your clients perhaps, but we're doing it in a more psychoeducational way, and we're not getting into like deep, heavy beliefs there. Okay.
Jen, I'll just add one in there because I think one of the
please.
things we saw a lot, and I see in myself a lot too, is it's the ruminating one. It's like, when am I going to be able to? When are we going to be able to? Will we ever be able to X again? You know, and that's just it's a terribly unproductive thought because we just don't have answers to those questions, but it's so easy to get stuck in that whirlpool.
Yes, and particularly with the behavioral loop, I'm in that one often of like looking constantly for news updates. So when I'm in that thought pattern, I'm then spending too much time like looking to see what the governor just said and what did the school system just say, and that can just, you could just lose so much time and energy before you know it. So, okay. All right. Okay, so now we've taught them, hey, thoughts matter, and here's some major errors to keep in mind. Now we want to give them just a handful of strategies in order to basically work those thoughts to get them to a better place. So how do we think better? This, again, is not a comprehensive list of CBT or other therapeutic interventions. These are our kind of go-to, so we went with those. So first thing is making sure that they are aware of their thoughts and not only catch the thought, but then re-describe it as a thought. So I'm worried that I may lose my job versus I'm getting fired, right? Statement of fact, it's happening. I'm getting fired today, or, you know, this week, it's only a matter of time, and stating it as a fact. Now, if that were indeed a fact, it would make sense that they would become anxious and be motivated to maybe look for other work. But if it's a thought, then we want to notice, okay, that's a thought. And then at that point, we can move through some of our other strategies. So first step, though, is you have to know a thought is a thought in order to rework it. So we gave them a few little go-tos here. First thing is you might want to do is ask yourself if the thought is accurate. Can I trust the content of the thought? Is it trustworthy? So this idea of check the facts, which is the same thing as checking the evidence for or against whether a thought. So first thing you might want to ask yourself is, can I trust it, right? And so for, we use a lot of metaphors here. Thank you. Thanks for the reassurance that people can hear me. See, I'm having a thought of like, oh my gosh, no one can hear me. No one can hear me. So let me, rather than getting caught up in my brain, let me ask and let me check my facts, right? So what's the evidence for this? Is there any reason why I should worry about this? I know So after you've checked the facts, like, so maybe it's like, you know what, maybe it's really not true that if we go back to the example of the group member who said, I didn't get anything done today. Today was a waste. I was completely unproductive. So she stated it as a fact. Instead thinking through, for her, it was like, okay, I'm having a thought that I didn't get a lot done today. Let me check the facts for that. And what she did is that's where she would literally write out, okay, no, I got a lot of things done. I did this, 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 and this. I didn't get necessarily what I wanted to get done, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Is another idea here with non-judgmental. But for her, it was helpful to just be like, oh, good, the noise stopped. So that's one strategy, is it accurate? The other one, and this is the one that I was thinking about when Cindy was teaching about comparisons, is this thought helpful? And this one I think is really important right now. I find, like, of the three, this is the one that I keep coming back to. It very well may be true, right? Whatever it is you're thinking. So I can get caught in, like, oh my gosh, like, there may not be school in the fall. We're going to see a softball field anytime soon, which is like our big, like, fun thing we do with our oldest kid. And it's a main, like, leisure experience for our family. Like, no telling when that's going to happen. So I'm stating it in a way that is accurate. Like, right now, we do not know this. There's no way to know this. And so for me, I have to be like, okay, is this helping me to, like, think about this? Because when I start thinking about the not knowing and the fact that I can't therefore, like, look forward to something, I just get down and discouraged. So if I can remember, like, okay, you know what, it's not helpful. Let me turn my attention to something else. And what is helpful to turn to is something in the moment, in the present, like right in front of you. Because a lot of these thoughts, you know, particularly looking ahead, like, that's in the future. So what can we do right now, right? Get yourself present. And what is one positive thing you can do?
Because one of the things that we found with people who were, like, not therapists is they didn't realize that they actually could have agency over their thoughts.
Yes.
And that second one, you know, is this helpful to have now, sort of opened up the door to them to be able to say, I actually have some control over whether I have this thought right now. And that actually was a pretty big realization. And it gave them the freedom to be able to say, okay, I'm just going to put a pause on that thought and focus on something in the here and now. And that ended up being a pretty powerful tool for them.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Cindy, if we could go to the next slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Then this will just show you some examples, and I'm looking at our time, so I'm not going to walk through all of them. But if you just kind of see the beginning, the first one is like statement of fact, and instead, okay, we need to describe it as a thought, and then you know, we can check out the accuracy of that. So you may end up with something like, well, it will end, we just don't know when. Right. And then the second one is example of, is this a helpful thought or not? So I think we had a number of women resonate with this one. And so instead of thinking about how behind they were, it was, well, what's one thing I can do right now that's on my list? Let me focus on that. And then let me take you to the next one. And we just pulled this from dialectical behavior therapy. So for those of you that are familiar with that, basically giving them a brief version of teaching them non-judgmental stance. And there are so many ways that we are not living consistent with how we really want to be right now. And so it's important that we found it to be important that you help your group members to be on the lookout for negative judgments. And so a judgment in this perspective, what we're talking about is using kind of global labels or global terms, like big words that are general words that kind of describe some things as being good, bad, and leaves out a whole lot of information, first of all. And then also just tends to create a lot of guilt and shame. And so if you're really struggling with, oh my gosh, I'm so incompetent, or I'm terrible, or I'm bad, or I'm da-da-da, like any of those big negatives, then you could use this skill. And like, so we had an example of a person whose like kid like got hurt in their nursery, and she just kept like going after herself. You know, it just was that example of ruminating, of like, oh, I can't believe I did that. That was just so irresponsible, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a situation where the furniture should have been moved or something. And we used that as a very, I think, a helpful example for her of how do you re-describe, rather than like, oh, I was, negligent, like kind of left it big picture, which is, of course you're going to feel horrible if you're a negligent parent. It was like, okay, on this afternoon, on this day, I didn't close this drawer and my daughter, tripped on it. Right? That's re-describing specifically what happened. And then saying to yourself, okay, next time I will make sure to close the drawer before I leave for her nap. And it was such a simpler, lighter re-describe. And you could just see her like, oh, right. Like, so next time I'll just close the drawer, versus I'm a negligent parent. Oh my gosh, how could I have done this? This is horrible. And then there's some other examples here that just show you how you can take those, like, I'm incompetent, or I was a bad X, Y, or Z, and then re-describe it in a way that gets more specific information, but certainly tends to like decrease the power and the negative impact of such a thought. So at this point now, we've walked you through 3 main ways that you can rework your thoughts, and kind of building on, not only are you now able to observe your thoughts, you're able to challenge them, you're able to redirect yourself, and also re-describe them. And this is something that is we're introducing the skill, knowing that, like for example, in CBT, this is something that takes people weeks and weeks to do. But we want to get them out there as an early skill for them to try. And I think they took quite well to it, and were able to apply it very effectively. Other things you want to add there, Cindy?
No, I think you're right on. And it was actually quite amazing how quick the uptake was.
Yeah. Yes.
I think in times of desperation, people learn this stuff quickly.
Oh, maybe is it worth saying one thing is that you and Pat, you did a little, like, while you didn't do, of course, like a whole screening, like you didn't do an intake. There was a little bit of a screen that's like, to our knowledge, we did not have someone who was actively, majorly depressed in the because I could imagine this type of thing, if you had someone in the group, it could get away from you if someone was majorly depressed or having a really, really hard time with rigid thought patterns, because I'm aware that we're teaching it in this more coaching style.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's worth being vigilant for. And also I think the situation, having a group where people were all in similar situations was really helpful in terms of the sharing.
Yes.
All having kids. And actually in our case, I think all being women was really helpful, because there was some concerns about alternative gender that came up every once in a while that people bonded around. And that became a topic occasionally, how to get your partners, they all had male partners, how to get your partners on board.
Okay. So your next meeting is just like we did, the last discussion. Okay. So I won't walk through that. But the main focus again is observing, discussing, what did they do with their thoughts? How did they try to evaluate them? And then you are their cheerleader, their teacher, encouraging efforts and gains. And it can be a real neat discussion. And then in terms of assignments for homework, what we want them to do is start just like we did last time with thoughts. Now we're going to do a similar thing now, but around emotions. So we want them to start paying attention to what they're feeling, and in particular, what types of challenges are they having related to their emotions. And then in our next week here, we're now in the third of the 4 series here of didactic and discussion. Now we're looking at emotion management, and this is very much pulled from DBT, which is a much more extensive emotion management intervention. And I will also say these are just the ones that I tend to use most commonly, but you may be like, well, where's this skill or where's that skill? You can add, modify as you want. All right, so this is your homework review. And then as they're describing their challenges with their emotions, you're tucking those in, and then you're going to tie those into when we move into our next slide. Notice it's a similar pattern to what we did before, right? We talked in our last didactic about, okay, how are thoughts tough right now during COVID-19? We're going to do the same thing, but this time around emotions. And, you know, all types of feelings you might have right now. You might notice that you're having, gosh, I could do an hour on this slide. This is so, I love this stuff right here. So I'm just noticing the urge to do it in lots of detail. Instead, I'm going to do the summary. So big takeaways. We are all dealing with lots and lots of emotions right now. Right? So your feelings are going to go up, down, left, right, center. You might notice your reactivity is higher, your sensitivity. So it's easy to have a lot of feelings. You might be feeling like, I'm doing okay in this pandemic. And then half an hour later, you feel completely discouraged and hopeless and you can't get up off the couch. So that's like general lability, right? Like kind of like the foundation of emotion you're experiencing. And then some specific things to add on top of that. I don't know if you've seen, we've been seeing a lot of writings around how we're basically in this grief pattern, a complex grief, or I've heard ambiguous grief as another term of like, wow, there's all these ways that we are having loss after loss after loss, either actual loss of life, like people we know and care about have died or are ill, or having major health outcomes. And then you put on that, like, okay, more kind of sometimes abstract losses, even of like loss of experiences of, oh, we were going to do this summer or this spring, or we were going to be further along professionally, or we were going to be doing our fertility treatments and now we have to stop. And then I know we probably all have seen these like heartbreaking examples of weddings, graduations, proms, you know, these big milestones that have been just cut from life. So as you are teaching this, you are again highlighting these are the ways that we're going through grief, and you may be going through grief and you may not have even known it, right? And we're giving that psychoeducation so that people feel more understood, they can understand better what they're going through. And then Cindy, do you want to speak to this last piece here about the stew? Because I know that's one of your metaphors and it was a big hit.
Yeah, I don't know where I pulled this one out of, but people were just talking about not being able to differentiate their emotions and not being able to label them. And I just had this image of sort of like a stew where all of your feelings are just sort of like mushed together. And we just started talking about, instead of trying to pull it all apart, you know, think about it in terms of having the different pieces of a meal nicely put on a plate and just focusing on the asparagus or focusing on the tomatoes, you know, just pulling out one of the emotions that you're feeling, acknowledging that there are a whole bunch going on, but just spending time focusing and trying to understand and manage one of them. And that in and of itself can be a pretty heady accomplishment in a situation where you're really feeling stewish.
Yes. Yeah. So whatever your go-tos are, if you have a certain metaphor or a teaching strategy, pull that in, because the more concrete and specific you can be, given that think about emotion management, that's years of psychotherapy. You're going to do it in an hour. So you're like, what can I give you that's concrete that you can take away and start practicing? So here are a few things that we taught them. Again, just like with thoughts, it's important that you even know you're having an emotion. And then practice noticing and naming, being specific in what it is that you're feeling. And then here's a list here that I'll walk you through in a moment. But then once you know you're having an emotion, here's some different ways that you can respond to it. That I'll pull out the validating your emotion, because we didn't spend as long on that with the participants due to time, but that skill is basically saying there's a reason you feel the way you feel, right? Particularly if you've now re-described first, saying, well, I'm feeling discouraged right now in this moment. Okay, why am I feeling discouraged? Because, oh, I'm in week 10 of a pandemic. I have reason to feel discouraged. You know, that would be an example, right? It makes sense to feel down sometimes. So let me walk you through though these next 3 skills here. Okay, so here's an example of an emotion wheel, which is basically a graphic that takes emotions from a more general or global place that's in the middle of the circle. And as you broaden out, it takes each of those emotions and gets more and more specific in the language. So particularly if you look at something like, let's say the green piece of the pie. A lot of people say, oh, I feel bad. or they might say, I feel stressed. And as you go out, thank you, then you can see that you can get even more specific. And the more specific you get, I know that when I feel like, oh man, I'm feeling like in a funk today. And then I'll realize, oh, I'm bored. If I realize I'm bored, then I can think, okay, what do I need to do to honor being bored? Right? I need to do an activity that's interesting. That's going to take me in a different direction than if I notice, oh, I'm tired, I should take a nap. Right? So the more specific you get, the better you'll be in responding to the emotion you're having. Okay, so next slide. This is all about reducing vulnerability to negative emotions, basically like your susceptibility, how likely you are to have negative emotions. And so we walk our group members through both like returning to that idea of self-care, but now tying it into kind of emotional, like your emotional tank or your emotional reserves, as well as this idea, which I think, in general in psychotherapy, I think, oh, building in positives is kind of this light concept of like, oh, let's do nice things or fun things or rewarding things. And man, it is tough in COVID. Like this one, I feel like this is a really, really tough one right now because it's hard to think of, it's hard to plan and look ahead right now. And just the repertoire of what's available has been so dramatically shrinked, right? Oh, like we'll go to this place or we'll go eat here or we'll go see so-and-so. And so much of that is stopped. So you'll have to be creative and trying to figure out what are ways I can build in positives during this time. So both self-care and positives are examples of how you reduce vulnerability. This skill we spent more time on. It's one of my favorite DBT skills. This is the skill of acting opposite. So what it involves is when you're having an emotion that you would like to change, right? So if you're feeling down or anxious and you would like to feel something else in that moment, then you can look at the skill of acting opposite. And here are the steps, and I know I'm doing it on the quick side. You would be teaching this with more time in the actual group. You're noticing the emotion that you're having. Okay, so like we used an example given the academics that we were teaching, feeling anxious, like maybe in a Zoom call, feeling anxious and they're having this like, oh, I think I need to ask a question, but I'm really anxious right now. And so my urge that comes from being anxious is to be quiet or like avoid what it is that's scary. But man, I really don't want to be anxious. I'll be anxious the whole time. And I really do need to ask this question. So I want to change this in this moment. So then you ask yourself, what is the opposite behavior of being quiet, right? It would be asking the question, right? And doing that behavior fully, like doing it, throw yourself into it. So rather than sitting for 40 minutes stewing about whether or not you ask the question and then ask it with a minute left and then you don't really get your answer, if then you're gonna, as soon as you think about it, I want to, you put your hand up or you put it on the chat and you ask the question, right? So it's throwing yourself behaviorally into the opposite behavior of whatever it is you were feeling like doing before. And when you do that, you actually open the door to having a different experience and a different emotion may come. So what is really freeing with this skill is that we don't have to wait to not feel anxious, right? We can do a different behavior even while anxious. And it will radically, like really does, man, open such a different possibility. So if you look at the next slide, it walks through, here are some different ways, like basically you're gonna see the emotions are on the left and the natural kind of behavioral urge is on the right, right? So when you're sad, it's really, you feel like withdrawing. When you're scared, you feel like avoiding, or you might worry and like ruminate. When you're angry, often the urge is to lash out. And when you feel guilty or ashamed, like the urge may be to apologize or to hide or to self-punish. And particularly for those first three, you can just see how, oh, instead of withdrawing, I need to engage, right? Instead of avoiding, I need to approach. Instead of lashing out, I need to be kind. That will take you in a radically different place. And then here on the latter part, guilt and shame, those are more complicated emotions anyway. But there's a few steps here. And the main thing that you do is you check in with yourself to see if whatever behavior you did, like, so let's say maybe after you raise your hands, right? And you ask the question, maybe afterwards you feel ashamed of doing it. Like, oh, I didn't do a good job, or it was bad, or this, or I took up too much time, or, you know, like you have all kinds of negative self-critical thoughts, and then you feel like, oh man, I'm embarrassed or something. Then you're like, wow, this feels like crap. I don't want to feel this way. Then you may ask yourself, okay, well, what did I actually do? Remember that skill of non-judgmental? Like, let me get specific. What did I do? Okay, I asked a question in the meeting. That's what I did. That's the actual behavior. Everything else is like the color I'm adding to it, you know, from my thoughts. Okay, well, was asking a question in a meeting against my value system? And if it's not against my value system, it means that I behaved in a way that was honorable for me, and that I don't, that guilt, that shame is what we would call unjustified. And therefore, I need to just keep doing the behavior of raising my hand in the meeting. I just gave myself more homework. I need to ask like every meeting now. Conversely, if I did something where I was like, oh man, that was against my values, then maybe I need to apologize, make amends, and then let it go, right? So if like you snapped at your kids, like you may apologize. Okay, sorry, mommy lost her temper. Okay, and then I'm gonna move on and try to do better the next day. So I know I'm going through this quickly, but this is a really valuable skill, and I encourage you to give it a go. Cindy, anything you want to say there?
No, ma'am, that was perfect.
Okay. Okay. Now the next skill, the next set of skills is what we would call, they come from DBT in terms of distress tolerance. The idea here is emotions are high. You're just having a rough day. You're in a rough time. If you want to think of a continuum of like, you know, green, yellow, orange, red, you're trying to keep yourself out of the red part of the emotions, right? You might be more in that yellow to orange and, oh gosh, I could see myself getting more and more panicked or more down. What can I do to try to bring things down back towards the green? And here is a whole list of things that are all examples of distraction. And the main concept is, if you cannot change, if you can't problem solve your way through it, if you can't change your thoughts, if you can't act opposite, and it's just, it is what it is, then try to take a break from whatever the thing is, right? So this is a whole list of different things you can put your mind on that would create an alternative stimulus, basically a distraction, and you'll get a break from whatever it is that's continuing to make you worry or panic or be down. And looking at time, I'm going to leave it at that. And then the big mama skill here at the end is this idea of radical acceptance, which is so much of our distress can come from having a kind of pushing against the world as it is, or the situation that we're in. And instead, what we're going to practice here is accepting, like, it is what it is. This is the situation, you know, yes, I'm, you know, like, so for example, with me, for like the stuff with sports, I'm like, maybe like fall of 2021 we'll be on the softball field. Like, I just, if I start thinking, as hard as that's like, oh my gosh, I can just feel the loss of that. If I start practicing like, okay, the summer's gone or the fall's gone, and like, that's what it is, then it allows me to just start going, okay, like, that's really sad, and I can feel the sadness, versus like, we should be out there, or it shouldn't be like this, or I can't believe it's like this. And I'm kind of putting all this energy and emotional like turmoil into pushing against the way the situation actually is. And one of the main ideas with radical acceptance is teaching that this is something that you do again and again and again. And a lot of times I think people think of like, oh, some like Zen Buddhist calm process. And it's like, no, this is like an intentional choice where you're going to feel grief every time you do it. And it will still bring more peace long term. So that is your whirlwind tour of emotion management that you would do in an hour. And for homework, you're going to just say, basically, go practice these things, and pick one or two that's particularly helpful to you.
As Jen said before the discussion, exact same as it was before, the same as she walked you through. And then we ask people, we sort of bring it back to the work situation, since this all came about by how to work more smart, and we gave them some skills in the middle for thought and emotion management, but now we want to bring it back home to the work situation. And so for the last week, it's reviewing homework, talking about managing uncertainty and planning for the future, and then homework for the next meeting. And, you know, basically going through what Jen just said. How did it go when you tried some of these different emotion management strategies?
How many participants do we find worked best? I think we had
6.
6 was really nice.
Yeah, 6 is about good. More than that, it gets tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's with that, particularly, were you saying 6, were you including us or not including us in that? Yeah.
Not including us.
Yeah, I wouldn't go over 6. Yeah. So now you're in your last big didactic, and the main, you're now preparing for the group to end, basically, and looking ahead to what is the next like psychological challenge. And what we said is, look, you're in this uncertain time. Like, we're all here. And often when you're planning ahead, like just even saying, oh, let's plan ahead. It's like, well, we don't even know how do you plan when you don't know how to plan? Or when you feel like you can't plan. And so again, we do the psychoeducation and the normalizing of like, this is where we are. We are in a time when we really don't know what or when is going to happen. And we have very limited control in this process. And that is all really hard. So let's think through a few ideas of what could make that easier. Basically, how do we lighten the heavy load that is? What we found to be helpful, but again, you could add to this. Big idea first is, and I hope you hear this across all the sessions, is we're trying to get people to be more specific and concrete and break complex experiences down into smaller, more manageable, tangible things. So rather than life is so uncertain, okay, what is certain, what is not certain? So like the kids will have, I'm saying like the kids are going to have some kind of school. That's what I'm thinking, like some kind of school. I don't know when or how, but learning of some kind will be happening. So I can plan for that, for example. We will have some kind of work. I don't know if it'll be this or that, and you can kind of break it apart. Each person needs to do it for their own life situation. But what are the certain needs and what are the uncertain needs? And then you can take solace in knowing that there is more certainty than you might realize, but then also start planning for the fact that we do have uncertainty. And how do we do that? One is you can, radically accept that there is the uncertainty, right? Like, you know what? I don't really know how much money we'll be making. I don't know that. But I know these are our expenses. So maybe I can start troubleshooting, problem solving, thinking through, looking for alternative forms of income, or know a lot of people, they're refinancing their houses to bring their mortgage payments down. They're opening a home equity line, or talking to family about, getting a loan, or, think through some concrete practical steps that would help you navigate that domain of uncertainty. And then kind of as a nice complement to that is you distract from worrying about it or focusing on it. So basically, if you've done what you can do, don't, kind of catch your mind from wanting to continue to think about, oh my gosh, what if we can't pay the bills in 2 months? So that's a brief overview of some things you might want to think about with uncertainty, and then just can remember that you can use your thought errors, you can use your emotion management, all those other strategies you can bring to the forefront as you're managing this domain.
And it was really important that we spend more time on the thoughts and feelings, but pulling it back to professionally, we asked them to bring all the skills that they now have to really think about what realistic expectations are for them in the next 6 months or the next year. And have them come up with concrete strategies for how best to communicate this with their bosses and their supervisors. And this, if you just think about it, this goes back to, feeling comfortable raising your hand on a Zoom call. It's like not waiting till your anxiety has subsided, just get out there, make the effort, talk to your supervisors, get concrete about what you are and are not going to be able to do in the next 6 months or a year. We talked a lot about how to manage not living up to your own perception of others' expectations. And this was really a big one for our group. They were all they really wanted to please their supervisors and their bosses. And their perception was that their bosses' expectations of them were much bigger than they actually were. So it was helping them really develop a realistic perception of others' expectations of them, as well as reconciling their own revised expectations with their pre-COVID expectations. We're all having to revise what our expectations of ourselves are without feeling guilty or like a failure. Mm-hmm. And then finally, we talked about how to manage those comparisons with others who appear to have different circumstances. And it was super helpful for them to hear that people who don't have kids, who are living alone, for example, are also having difficulty focusing. Mm-hmm. It's not like everybody out else out there has a much easier go at it than you do. So just remembering that we're all in the same boat was really helpful. But we were trying to get people to act on these things actively, not just have them mulling around in their head as worry. Talk to your boss, write out your expectations, write out your post-COVID plan about what you're going to try to achieve. And the practical steps, be proactive about professional accommodations. Find out what your university is doing about tenure clock and deadlines. Make the call, look at the websites. Talk to your supervisor, your boss, your mentor about the challenges that you're facing. Every boss we talked to said they want to know what you're up against, because otherwise there's no way they can help. And they all wanted to help. Build strategic alliances. We talked about this in the very beginning. Peers working together to help each other, writing grants together, writing papers together, making it a little bit easier on yourself by sharing the burden with others. And then having realistic backup plans. Not obsessing about worst case scenarios, but there are people who are at risk at not having jobs, and it's not crazy. In fact, it's really smart and practical to have a plan B and maybe a plan C right now. And then personally, the same sort of thing. What lifestyle changes have you had to make due to COVID-19? And what ones would you like to continue? I mean, there have been some interesting things that have come out of this that we don't expect, like maybe working at home a couple days a week isn't such a bad thing. Are you finding yourself more grateful for some things, or looking forward to life experiences that you had previously experienced as boring or depleting? And then just being really clear about what sources of support you need to move forward from here, and what practical steps can you take to set these up. Again, communicating, asking the question, and really trying to arrange your world to set yourself up for as much success as you can possibly have during this time. And then more homework. Basically really write this stuff out. Write down your personal and professional next steps and get this stuff down on paper or electronically. And then spend some time reflecting on how the coaching sessions may or may not have been helpful. We then talk with the group about, what was helpful about the group, what wasn't so helpful about the group. And the pilot group that we did decided that they were going to carry on. So they kept doing the sessions informally afterwards because we found the peer support to be so helpful. Jen, you want to talk a little bit more about the wrap up before we wrap up?
Yes, no, I think you've got it. This is your final session, so you're bringing it home and you're talking with them about lessons learned. What do they want to do moving forward? And I think for me in that last meeting, and it needs to fit your group experience, but these women really connected with each other, and they all were talking about, oh, this is going to be so sad not to have this to look forward to. And we just told them directly, like, you've built something that is bigger than this coaching that we've done, right? You have a group experience that is you can generalize that basically still lives even without Cindy and I there. And you could just seen the relief and the excitement of what, this is like a real thing, and we could keep meeting. And right there on the spot, they started talking through, okay, well, who wants to meet next week? And they did a troubleshooting in real time, and they moved it back so it was better for one person's nap. And it was just the sweetest thing to watch them kind of take ownership. And before we finished that final meeting, they'd already set up their own Zoom for the next week. Like, these women got it done. So, that won't work for every setting every time you do this, but I think when there's good chemistry and potential, encouraging them to take that specific form of support and let it continue is a real positive. So no, I think those are my main thoughts. I know we're even over our time, but are there any questions, reactions, thoughts from what we've been talking about this morning?
And Jen and I are happy to be a resource too. If you decide to move this forward and put a group together, you know where to find us, and we're absolutely happy to, give you any more information or problem solve with you about putting a group together, or if you run into any, roadblocks or anything. It was fun to do. It felt good.
Yeah.
I hope you do.
Excellent. Okay.